Hi, this is Dr. L, and this is going to be a short lesson on the basics of arsenic. We'll talk about what arsenic is, the different chemical forms that arsenic can occur within, what the toxicity is, generally speaking, associated with arsenic, and how we can be exposed to arsenic. Arsenic is a naturally occurring element. It is, in fact, the 20th most common element on the earth. In its pure or metallic form, at least one of them, it looks like this gray, shiny substance shown here in a test tube, quite shiny, quite brittle, and that is metallic arsenic. Its atomic number is 33, meaning it has 33 protons, also 33 electrons. If you look at the configuration of electrons in an atom of arsenic, and a model of that is shown here on the right, it will have typically it will have five what are called valence electrons, or electrons in the outermost shell, very similar to atoms of the element phosphorus. And so arsenic can behave a little bit like phosphorus. It can chemically bond with many other kinds of atoms, forming compounds, and some of those compounds are structures that are actually commonly found in biological organisms. And this is thought to be one of the reasons why arsenic is so toxic. It is very toxic. It is considered a heavy metal, a term used in toxicology, meaning a metal or a metalloid atom/element that has high mass and known toxic properties. This is a periodic table, and the symbol for the element arsenic is capital A, lowercase s. It's over here in these metalloids, and you'll notice that it is in the same column or period as phosphorus, which I just mentioned. So this is naturally occurring. Like, we will always have arsenic on the planet. And like I said a moment ago, arsenic can form chemical bonds with many other kinds of atoms. So there are literally hundreds of different chemicals that can contain arsenic within them, and they have varying toxicities. Okay, so it can be a little overwhelming. There's no way that we could memorize all of the chemicals that contain arsenic. So shown here on this slide, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different chemical compounds. Okay, arsenite, arsenate, monomethyl arsenate, or MMA, arsenobutane, ASB, dimethyl arsenate, and arsenocholine. And this is just scratching the surface. But looking at these compounds, try not to get overwhelmed. We're going to clump them into two categories, which is commonly done. And those two categories are inorganic and organic. Let's start with organic. Organic means that the arsenic atoms are chemically bonded, and the lines depict chemical bonds. They're chemically bonded to carbon. So if we look at the MMA, or the ASB, or the arsenocholine, or the DMA, we see C's in there. C is short for carbon, okay? And so arsenic is chemically bonded to carbon. Anytime you have a carbon based molecule, and that typically also has some hydrogen, it is considered an organic molecule. These are the building blocks of life, and they're also just very important for a variety of reasons on the planet. So these are all considered organic arsenic compounds. Over here, we'll see arsenic is chemically bonded to atoms other than carbon. And now I'm looking at this. This isn't the best figure for this, because you might notice that it's just bonded with oxygen, right? But there are other things that arsenic can be bonded to that are not carbon and that are also not oxygen. For example, hydrogen. And those forms, all of those forms would be considered inorganic because they're lacking carbon. Typically, inorganic forms of arsenic are more toxic than organic forms. That's kind of a rule of thumb. Okay, so here are a few more arsenic containing compounds. Arsenic trioxide shown up here, arsenate, the MMA, the DMA that we looked at before, And these different compounds will behave differently with regards to where and in what medium they are found in the environment. Are they found in water? Are they found in rice? Are they found as a gas? And what is their toxicity? Okay, let's see. So a rule of thumb is that inorganic arsenic tends to be poison, and organic forms of arsenic tend to be less poisonous. So we're going to go with less toxic. They're not truly or fully non-poisonous because, as we discussed in an earlier lesson, really the dose determines the poison. And also, one form of arsenic can be converted to another form. So you could go from an organic form to an inorganic form and therefore have toxicity. So we want to treat all arsenic compounds with respect as poisons, but the acute and chronic toxicity of certain inorganic forms is higher, is greater. All right, so particularly toxic, so I'm going to mention it first, is a form called arsine. There's arsenic and it's bonded to hydrogen, hydrogen, and hydrogen. This is a very dangerous compound. It is found as a gas. It's an odorless gas. It's pyrophoric, so it can burst into flames. It is released from chemical reactions associated with metalworking, associated with the manufacturing of certain semiconductors, and sort of accidents that happen in industry. It is a systemic toxin and it is really severely harmful to red blood cells. This is one of the most toxic forms of arsenic. It's going to be inhaled as a gas. That's its route of exposure. So typically it's inhaled. It's a systemic toxin because it acts on red blood cells and it does so much damage to the red blood cells that they then damage your organs body-wide, especially the kidneys, and this can ultimately kill you at fairly low concentrations. This is a picture of blood plasma. On the left, that's what blood plasma should look like, that reddish rust color. And on the right, that's blood plasma from an arsine poisoned patient. So it's just like severely damaged blood. Very, very toxic form of arsenic. Okay. Arsine, still ASH3, still looking at that, right? If we look at the effects on human health, right? There's a short-term exposure limit, which is not more than 15 minutes. This is an occupational exposure limit of 0.2 parts per million. At 0.5 parts per million, if people inhale that gas at 0.5 parts per million, you'll start to see certain symptoms. They're kind of unspecific, but a general feeling of malaise. You can smell this. Some people can smell it at 1 part per million. It's not technically the arsine. It's like a reaction product of arsine that you can actually smell. And then at just 11 parts per million, you'll see lethal effects start to happen in many people after 30 minutes. And then lethal within minutes if you get up to 250 parts per million. This is a really dangerous form of arsenic. If we look at lethal dose for 50% of test organisms, the LD50, which we covered in an earlier lesson, these are obviously not determined in humans. These are determined experimentally in other animals, right? So rats, mice, and hamsters are shown here. The route of exposure is oral, and arsine is across the top, and they must find a way to solubilize that gas in order to give it orally. Then this is sodium arsenite, arsenic trioxide, and calcium arsenate. All of these top four are inorganic forms of arsenic. MMA and DMA are organic. Arsenite is inorganic. MMA is organic. Arsenobutane and arsenocholine are organic. So they're kind of all mixed up here, right? But if we look across the top, we can pretty easily pick out our top, 3 to 4 most toxic forms of arsenic. And the most toxic form is arsine because it takes the smallest amount of it per kilogram of body weight to be lethal to 50% of the organism. So the smaller the LD50, the more toxic, the more potent the compound, the more dangerous the compound is. Okay, sodium arsenite 15 to 22. milligrams per kilogram body weight, arsenic trioxide 34, calcium arsenate from 20 to 800, so there's more variability in that. And then we start to jump up the MMA and the DMA. It takes a lot more of those chemicals in order to see toxicity. Down here, this is greater than 10,000, and this is like 6.5 times 1,000, right? 10 to the 3 is 1,000. And then the arsenite and a certain form of MMA in hamsters, and particularly if given intraperitoneally, which is a different form of exposure done in research, those are lower LD50s. So again, showing a lot of toxicity, at least when in hamsters. So this is pretty toxic chemicals, right? So the toxic effects for arsenic in many different forms really vary, but we can clump them into being acute or chronic, all right? And we're going to focus first on the acute. So acute symptoms of arsenic poisoning are nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, dehydration, lethargy, delirium, abdominal pain, burning in the stomach and the esophagus, okay? And it affects many different tissues and organs and biological functions body-wide. So it really has systemic effects, right? The acute dose, which is often a term used to talk about the dose that will kill a test organism, okay? I took this from the CDC, it says, which said that as little as 1 to 2.5 milligrams per kilogram of arsenic trioxide is a potentially fatal dose. This is for humans. Over here, we've got rat acute dosages, and these are different chemicals, right? So like a certain amount of water will kill a rat, right? A certain amount of sugar, because remember that idea of the dose determines the poison. And if we look down here, there's caffeine, right? Caffeine can be quite toxic and can kill rats, and it can kill you as well if you take too much of it. Nicotine, which we get from cigarettes or from chewing tobacco, or from like nicotine gum or other products, vaping. A 50 milligram dose will kill a rat typically, and in arsenic, and this is inorganic forms, 50 milligrams will kill a typical lab rat. This is pretty toxic stuff. Chronic exposures give people a variety of symptoms, right? So I'm just going to show a couple of them that are particularly known for arsenic. One is something called peripheral, which means like the outside of your body, like the ends of your limbs. So these are the peripheral areas of your body, your hands and your feet, okay? Peripheral neuropathy, which means nervous system damage. So you can't really feel properly in your hands or your feet. That's a symptom of chronic arsenic exposure. There's also something called arsenic keratoses. So it's a dermal or skin symptom. So these are not dirty hands. These are permanent darkened lesions from arsenic exposure that are seen over long-term exposure to arsenic. It's a classic symptom of arsenic exposure. Another chronic effect is cancer. So arsenic is a known human carcinogen. All of the agencies that look at and categorize chemicals based on whether or not they do cause cancer in humans, and they look at a large body of proof to prove that, have conclusively shown that arsenic causes cancer. And the kinds of cancers that it causes are varied, right? So this is a slide of like chronic symptoms for arsenic. So you can get diabetes from arsenic exposure, impaired cognitive development, reduction in brain weight, so the serious side effects in kids and developing humans. You can get liver cancer, cervical or prostate cancer, so cancers of the reproductive system, skin cancer, kidney cancer, bladder cancer, and upper urinary tract carcinoma, which is a type of cancer. So many different kinds of cancer associated with arsenic